Hey folks, welcome to the next restoration video of Guitar Harbor. Our patient this week is the old Gibson J50 Deluxe from 73 to 75, which needs a new binding on front and back, which needs several pickguard cracks repaired that are pretty brutal, and already someone stuffed glue inside. It needs a new bridge because this bridge has been shaved and it's now too thin, and the action is still high. So we also have to reset the neck, and when I reset the neck, I don't want to reset it to a shaved bridge. I will put on a high fresh bridge and then reset the neck. The frets are also worn and have to be replaced. So overall, this is a massive job. There's more to it than showed yet. The bridge pad needs some patching. There was a loose brace. Yeah, I think that's enough. It was a pretty big operation overall and took me several months to complete. I just always shortly documented the steps I did here, and I lost some footage of the binding removal, what was actually kind of easy because the binding was already so brittle and dead that it was coming off easily. The most difficult thing to remove from the whole guitar was actually the pickguard, if I remember correctly, because this is a very thin plastic, and you need heat to remove it, but heat is also not his friend, and you can break it very easily, and we have to be kind of careful about it. But everything went kind of well. You can hear the binding on front and back was probably the by far biggest operation I had here. It's really brittle, and this is a celluloid rod as it's called. There's no way of saving it, and I think I don't want to try to save it with super glue in this case or with anything, because it's already too severe, and if you start putting on super glue now, a complete removal of the binding will become even more difficult for the next person. So I decided to remove this binding, even if that would be pretty visible once it's done. This is not a collectible guitar. This is too worn already, and anyway, this is not the typical collector's year of Gibson and not the collector's model. So the aim here really is to make this a nice feeling guitar that plays well, sounds good, feels good. And this binding is, if you touch it, you kind of pinch yourself, because it's not good. It doesn't look so bad on the first glaze, I guess, but when you touch it, it sucks. And it's going to get worse and worse, and even worse is that this binding rod usually affects everything surrounding this guitar, especially metal parts, and several substances are just constantly rotting. So I really want to have this off, to have a fresh start. And since I have to reset the neck anyway, this is the best time to also remove the binding, because the binding extends under the neck body joint, and if I remove the neck, I can also get this off there. This is probably the longest sequence in this video. This is and this is just this, I don't know, it took me longer to take off this pickguard. And the rest of the sequences I show will be kind of short, just to give an idea of all the steps that are involved in this restoration. The pickguard will be later glued on with double stick tape from 3M, because I don't know if this has done with shrinking at all or if it continues shrinking, and I think if I stick it back on with this double stick tape from 3M, it will not crack the wood again. So it should be a good idea to do this. And also this 3M double stick tape, I forgot the number. There's a certain number that is preferred for this kind of job. You can remove it if you need to without damaging the guitar, especially if you cover the wood with some shellac before. This pickguard really was like a moon surface, and I clamped it actually for several months in this blocks, and afterwards it was better, and it shrank a lot. You will see later on the finished guitar just how much this shrank. Okay, here we have this huge pickguard crack coming from shrinking of a pickguard. The pickguard pulls itself, together and takes the wood with it, and the previous guy just filled some kind of white wood glue into the crack and left it like this. What was maybe better than nothing, but this crack had a huge height difference of the two sides, and it was just not done well. So my aim here is not to make this invisible, but to make this reliable and smooth. I think this, you shouldn't feel it, at least. Anyway, it's directly next to the pickguard, so it's not in an area where you touch it a lot. It wasn't so easy to get out all the glue from the crack because some of it ran in between the top and the braces under there. So it took me some time to get this stuff out. You can see here there's a braces directly under it. Here you can see the bridge pad is kind of damaged. This is not a bridge pad I would attempt to remove. The fretboard extension somehow has a different color than the neck on the neck itself. So I started kind of generally by removing all parts that were on the guitar that I had to remove. First the pickguard, then the neck and bridge and the binding. And once everything is kind of removed and clean, then you always have to have a plan of the steps ahead, because sometimes it doesn't matter what you do next, but in many cases you have to think ahead. Like, you don't want to reset the neck and then put in a new bridge afterwards, for example. You need to glue on the new bridge first and then aim for the correct height afterwards. You don't want to put the neck on before the new binding is installed and so on. So here I cleaned the channel. It was pretty messy to get all the stuff off, so I went to a bigger workshop and I somewhat lost the footage of it. It was pretty easy actually to remove, though you had to be very, very careful not to take too much wood off the back and sides, especially with you. I managed to do that actually. I was quite happy with that results. The big problem I had with the whole restoration here was that the varnish on the side and back is super chippy, like the chippiest I've ever seen. And in this area where the binding rod, it also also damaged already the varnish. So whenever you started scoring it or removing the binding, some of the finish came with it, and there was just no way around it. I didn't want to refinish the instrument at the end, so the end result will be quite visible, as I had to cover the remaining varnish with super glue. Anyway, that's later. Here now I do the classic neck reset or neck removal first. I'm using StewMag heat sticks, two at a time, and then actually a StewMag neck removal jig, and it was pretty easy on this case. Everything went very well. I know that you can use, I'm also watching a lot of videos on YouTube, that you can use as foam fire hot wires that are way thinner than the StewMag heat stick. But I don't know, I got used to the StewMag heat stick, and I think with the heat stick you manage to, because it has a way bigger diameter, what is an asset but also a problem, you manage to apply more heat in a short amount of time, leading to a cleaner removal. Actually, this footage is not in the right folder. Of course, I removed the fretboard tongue first before I removed the neck. So I think the problem with this heat stick is that you will have holes that are visible for the trained eye afterwards. But the chance of damaging the sides or the neck at removal are therefore reduced. I would think, if you do it correctly. But both work well, and it's both a bit of matter of experience and being familiar with it. I think, especially on this non-collectible guitars, seeing this tiny covered holes shouldn't be a problem. So here's the neck off without any damages, he said. So I think I already talked about this in earlier videos. The main reason why instruments need a neck reset is not that the neck isn't firmly attached to the instrument anymore and you just put it back firmly. I see that in a lot of guitars I get, that people reset the necks but they didn't change or didn't account for the changed geometry of the whole instrument, and then the neck is back in and the neck angle is still wrong and it's glued in with fresh modern glue and everything is just, you know, worse than it was before, and at the same time it's a lot of work. So you really have to understand that the whole geometry of this of guitars change over time, and the string tension, it's less like a bow, just a tenths of millimeters here, tenths of millimeters there, and it leads up to a few millimeters higher action, what makes the instrument unplayable. Okay, next step here is a bridge pad to fill these holes that you could see earlier with super glue and sawdust, maple sawdust. I use this scissor jack, and on the scissor jack I unfortunately didn't film that. I put on a foam pad, and on the foam pad I put a a piece of this kind, first a frame, a little wooden frame on the edges, and then on this frame I lay a piece of Teflon sheet. Means that the Teflon should in theory touch the bridge pad with the edges, and I have a little bit of room to put on the sawdust, and the super glue will not stick to Teflon. And then you do several rounds of sawdust and super glue, and it should lead to a better tuning stability, they say. Okay, here you can see how I flattened out the cracks. I first cleated from the inside and leveled them. Actually, this upper one was pretty thin, so I think that was all that was needed. Here I trace the outside of the bridge on a piece of rosewood. I think this is Indian rosewood that I use. And I think, yeah, the original bridge was either Rio or I don't know. It looks a bit different, but this isn't too far off the fretboard, so I was okay with it. I couldn't find anything better at the moment. My wife is really good at making these bridges, and so she gave me the raw bridge and I finished it later. You can see the pickguard crack here is kind of too big to just fill it with glue, so I put in a spline. Here I re-glued a brace, and then I started securing the remaining lacquer there with super glue. This might have been a little bit of a mistake, it's hard to say, because wherever the super glue hit the lacquer, it kind of got sucked under the original lacquer, and where it cured there, the wood got darker. I think if I wouldn't have done this, I would have lost a lot more of the original lacquer, so I'm not sure if that would have been better. I think there was just no way of doing this without working extremely careful and slowly. So for the binding, it wasn't easy to find the size. It was 3mm times 7mm binding, and I managed to saw some bigger pack at 1.5mm times 7 and laminated two together. This is pretty thick stuff, and it's not that easy to get it pretty tight to the whole body everywhere, but it worked out well. I heard canopy glue is the way to go here, so I tried it out, and I did some tests with it, and on the test at least it was stronger than acetone. The whole thing with the binding repair ended up being kind of visible, so I probably could have used acetone anyway. But this canopy glue is very nice to work with because it's not poisonous and you can just wipe it away with a glove. It's nice to work with. Feels like working with wood glue. So my wife helped me with this binding because it's way easier with 4 hands than with 2 hands. especially when you have this kind of massive binding. You really need a lot of force on the tape. And here I think if I wouldn't have secured the remaining lacquer everywhere with super glue, I would have lost a lot of lacquer here. Because this was, I just filmed this for a few seconds, but it took some weeks to fill up all the little voids and holes and problem zones on top on the body with super glue. You kind of have to fill it and then come back on the next day, then it shrank, come back, and several times all on both sides. I don't know, it took me weeks. And yeah, if anyone knows a better idea besides refinishing, but I don't know, this was a big enough project for me, and I don't do this kind of refinishing. So anyway, we have a new binding on the guitar. I'm pretty happy with the result. Yeah, there's no holes or problem zones or anything. Looks good. Of course, the elephant in the room here, and now it looks better still, is that you still have to scrape it flush with the rest, because otherwise you always have this kind of edge. It was the most difficult task in the whole process. And since my aim was just to make this a player, I wasn't too careful about this, especially not on the sides. Because this is celluloid binding and it's super thick. I couldn't really reliably chisel it, so I had to scrape it, and I could have taken days, maybe super carefully, and get a little bit better result, but it wasn't in the budget here. You will see later. So there was one tiny spot where I lost some wood on the side when I removed the binding, and I filled that up now with super glue. This also took very long to fill up all the little small damages. With super glue, and then before I leveled the binding. I started using just a razor blade, but then I built myself a bigger holder and for the razor blade, and it got way easier afterwards. Here you can see how it looks like after scraping, I think. Yes, that was after scraping. And there was some places where a lot of the original lacquer was removed during scraping. I'm not sure if there was an easy way around that. And now after that I used some files to smooth it over to have a nice round edge. And then I started with 240 grit up to 3000 just to make it smooth. I really like this Kovacs, what is it, Asilex. Once you use it, there's no turning back. So the front turned out great. What was way easier, because there's still the purfling and the lacquer on the front was holding way better to the wood. Apparently this lacquer has a better how you say in English, connection, let's say, to spruce and to mahogany. You can see the bridge. There's no saddle slot yet. I put that on the old spot and trace the outline with a razor blade so I know where to take away the remaining lacquer under there. This glue, this bridge and also the neck was not glued on with high glue. So I still wanted to use high glue for the bridge, and that's why I decided to secure it additionally with 2 bolts. Also that really helps with a re-glue to keep it in position. There's other ways of doing it, of course. But I think it's in general a good idea in this case. The bridge needed to be fitted a bit to the top, but not too much. This top does not have a strong arch, so there wasn't that much to be done. I just have some self-sticking PAD grid on a small block of wood. I just had to take away a little bit in the middle of the bridge. Before I didn't show many things actually. I finished this bridge with a few layers of tung oil to make this kind of shiny. I think this is what Gibson does also. I'm not sure. It might be, at least on some. It always looks nice on the bare wood. So threads have been pulled. They came out pretty nicely. And I filled these holes with actually rosewood from cello packs. There, I know the grain is not in the same direction, but you really have to pay attention to see that usually. This fretboard is kind of light, and I unfortunately burned the wood next to the heat sticks because it was a mistake. But it's not so bad. I think it's fine. I think too many people are a bit too obsessed with visuals of guitars, and they're kind of neglecting that they're meant to be played and have to work as instruments and tools in the first place. And this is certainly a player anyway, so I'm not too concerned with this kind of stuff here. So So I own this guitar at this time where I restore it, so that, I can kind of restore it in the way I feel it's right. So here I glue on the bridge with hot hide glue. I like this thread rubbers for clamping. When a bridge fits the top well, you actually don't need too much pressure. Voila. Okay, I decided to refret the neck before I put it back on, as it's a bit easier, especially with the fret. How you say? It's easier to make them smooth on the sides, especially the leveling. It doesn't matter if it's on there or not. It's a little bit easier to put them in most spots, and it's easier to make them smooth on the sides without hitting a guitar. The downside here is that usually after a neck reset you have a little bit of hump on the neck body joint, but I wouldn't want to sand away too much on this fretboard anyway, because it's not that thick. And so I decided just to use high frets, so I have to have a lot of room for dressing them afterwards. I glued them in with fish glue. I also used fish glue on the neck reset later. And this was standard procedure, more or less. This is in comparison to the binding repair, the something like a refret or even a neck reset becomes a rather quick job. I didn't show too much of it, but really the binding repair was the main stuff happening, the restoration. It took up 70% of the time, I would say. Voila, here the neck is done. Okay, now comes the neck reset. You have to change geometry of the heel a bit. I have the camera in one hand, so I can't really show it. Did that for a while, not too long actually, and then made sure the sides and the heel match. While checking that I'm still, you know, centered. And when that was done, I checked that if this dovetail still fits well, and it actually was still surprisingly tight. I really had to force it in. The only place that needed a bit of shimming was the very end of the dovetail joint. So this is how it looks like afterwards. I unfortunately rounded over the binding also where the neck meets the body, and noticed later that actually there will be a little tiny gap because I rounded over the binding, but it's no problem. Something to learn for the next time. I put in this kind of wax stick and more or less appropriate color, so there's no hole. So we are already pretty far, and it's not too much left anymore. The neck has to be glued on, and then there's still the bridge and saddle work, of course. I didn't show this too much, I think. So I put on fish glue and just clamped it and used a belt clamp. So now where the neck is on, I know where to route this slot for the saddle. I have this saddle routing jig from TLC Guitar Goods in Netherlands. Can recommend this. So here it is. Now of course it needs a bone insert in the right size and shape. Okay. Yeah, I glued on the tongue later. I also didn't shim the tongue because it was alright. There's a bit of fall away, but I don't think anyone really plays anywhere further than 15th fret. A bit of touch up on the rosette. A lot of this area where the neck meets the body had to be leveled a bit more. And of course crowning, polishing up to 12,000 in this case because we're on YouTube. Here you can see the bridge pad repair and some cleats. Reaming out the holes for the bridge pins. Figuring out where the intonation points are on the saddle. I use a way bigger saddle than would have been on there originally. I like to use a 3.2 millimeter thick saddles. That gives you a bit more room. And this shape should always be more or less the same. You know, I wouldn't not trust strings too much, because sometimes strings are have manufacturing problems, and then intonation point is somewhere where it shouldn't be if the string has a issue. So in theory, the geometry should be actually more precise in the long run than taking the string and relying on it, because if you get a bad string here, you might end up in the wrong position. Well, should be fine in most cases, but you shouldn't do this with cheap strings, certainly. Okay, one last thing I wanted to talk about, where I see it. When I was done with the guitar, you did the research. Which year was it? It seems to be between 73 and 75. And then this stuck out to me and was like, what? Truss rod cover with 3 bolts on a Gibson? And I thought I would just spend months restoring a fake. But then I did some more research, and luckily, apparently, because between 73 and 75, this is common, or not common, but still there's certain Gibsons who just have a 3-bolt truss rod cover. Don't ask ChatGPT. I did, and it was like, no, it never happened. But there's enough online forums of people who actually bought something in the 70s who said that was used. So I think this certainly looks like a legit Gibson from this time, and I don't, but yeah. So if you see this guitar and think 3 bolts, this is a fake, then there's exceptions. Okay, I'm not trying to screw anyone here. I just wanted to talk about this. So have that up front. All right, now finally I play it. This should be tuned more or less. It might also be the strings, but this is pretty heavy in bass. So this is set up more or less with 2.5 millimeters on the low E and around closely less than 2 millimeters on high E, what I think is a good action for 012 strings. You still have more or less 3 millimeter height on the saddle, so the can still be adjusted. Enough of talking now.